Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Fundraising Today and the Go Beyond Fundraising podcast. Today, I am sitting down with Kristen Gwen-Becker from HistoryIT. And Kristen, I feel really excited to talk to you today because about an hour before we sat down to record, I discovered that you have a TED Talk, and that's really cool and exciting. And you're really passionate about history and the future of what archives look like. And we're having this conversation because there are a lot of nonprofit organizations out there who have extremely rich histories and donors who are really passionate about that history. But a lot of history is locked up in physical media that can be difficult to get to. So I would love to have a conversation with you today about the work that you're doing at History IT and as well as your background and how you got to be so passionate about this topic of digital archiving.
Great. Yes, I'm super excited to be here, Leah, and always happy to talk about digital archive, digital history, how we can make it more accessible, how we can better engage our communities and our membership with the stories we have to tell from the past. Yeah, a little bit about me. I founded History IT just over 13 years ago, which seems impossible now. And we started, well, before that, I was a software and web developer for a while. And then I made the not very traditional move of leaving technology and going and doing a PhD in history. And so when I emerged from that, the world of the humanities, it's very academic, and I'm a specialist. I have a PhD. I get to go to archives and go through things and then interpret them for you and tell you what that means. That I didn't see that model as continuing to work in the digital world that we live in, or work as being the only model, because people want direct access to history, to information. They want to be able to search and discover materials and stories on their own. So I founded History IT with this desire to help organizations utilize this like trove of resources in order to better tell their story and better educate the public about what they do, engage membership, raise funds, just increase their value by utilizing these things that are like molding in basements and attics and seen as just, for the world of professional research. Yeah, so we're a software and services firm. We do digital collections and digital museums, soup to nuts. We work with organizations on the kind of a strategy to build a digital archive and museum, what it's going to take. We do all of the imaging, the cataloging, metadata. We have our own software platform. So really the soup to nuts of building a digital archive and museum.
I love hearing people talk about this kind of work because a little personal story about me. My grandmother was very interested in history and family history and genealogy. And whenever after she passed away and my family was going through all of her belongings to figure out what to do with everything, there were boxes and boxes of research she had been doing at different county seats and many copies of things because she had started doing family research for lots of different kind of branches of the family as she was uncovering all these different relatives. And it was just such daunting effort at the time to go through all of that and make sure that we cared for those items well and made sure that they got to the right places, that they weren't like just lost after that. And I tell that because I imagine for a lot of organizations with a lot of history and especially like membership based organizations where there may be, like, I'm thinking, for example, of like Greek organizations where maybe there have been several generations of a family that have been involved with that organization. Like preserving all of that is so important.
It is so important, and it is daunting is the word you used, and that is the word we hear from our clients and partners all day, every day, or when people reach out to us and say, we had no idea that you exist, because it's so daunting. And I get it. I understand why it is. And we are here to ease that burden. But what I'm terrified of is that organizations, people will find it so daunting that they just don't do it. Or they'll do some kind of quick and dirty version of what they think is being digital. And then that history is going to be lost. We have a lot of responsibility right now to preserve materials digitally for the future. And so it's daunting, it's big, it's scary. Let's go through this together and find a way to do it, because we have to. And if we don't, we say our mission is to save history. And that's real in terms of making materials digital in a way that's truly future proofed. It's going to last for generations and making it accessible. And if we don't do that, we will lose that history.
I'd love to come back to that to dig more into that and uncover how you future proof that. So you were in software and then you went and got your PhD in history. That's such an interesting transition. So what inspired that?
I'd say I'm generally a pretty curious person. I studied I studied history as an undergraduate as well, and I just kept being drawn back to it. I didn't want to teach, and that's also pretty unusual for pursuing graduate work in the humanities. But I got a fellowship to go to GW to do a PhD, and instead of teaching, it was a research fellowship to work on the Eleanor Roosevelt papers. And I thought, like, I was just intrigued by that. It was an early edition digital project. I'm very interested in the era and the person and thinking about working with documents as I was trying to find what I wanted to do with my life. It's an incredible privilege to spend several years of your life kind of drinking coffee and reading books and educating oneself and talking with similar people who are on that same quest. And I was just like most people, I think, early in their careers or lack of careers, just floating along. So there obviously wasn't intent like I'm going to go learn web development because it's the late 90s and I moved to San Francisco and that's just what we were doing. And then maybe I don't want to do this. Maybe I want to do something in history. And then, of course, I ended up bringing both of those two passions together. So I'm very lucky in that.
When was the aha moment for you when you realized there was this huge gap between, or this big challenge around digital archiving and the common challenges that lots of organizations that hold these kinds of documents run into?
The aha moment was very early on. When I started the company, I was mainly interested in kind of a consulting service. Like I'm going to help organizations utilize their archival content to see it. We live in a time when content is king and they're sitting on just millions of pages of unique content. And I want to help them use that. And then it became very obvious very quickly that just it was completely inaccessible, either because mostly because it was literally in paper and boxes and it would take days and days to find anything that you needed to be a professional researcher. You needed the skills of going through that kind of stuff to do anything, find anything that would be useful. And then the other piece of it was that some stuff was digital, but it wasn't like high quality and it was in a software system that was pretty much like an analog library system just put online. It was still required that you think like a researcher. So early on, it was like, okay, this is what we have to do. We have to build our own software platform that's usable by regular people, not just history geeks or library geeks like me. And we need to go on this kind of quest, this mission to help people understand what it takes to build a true digital archive, like what the digitization process needs to involve. That was definitely an early on. Oh, wow. So it's so inaccessible on every level. And we just have to start.
What are some of the challenges or concerns that people have around the permanence of digital archives or the lack of permanence of digital archives? And what's going on behind the scenes that makes it like really robust?
It's an excellent question. And thank you for asking it. There are two pieces of a digital archive. The two core components are the images and the metadata, or the cataloging and tagging. So the imaging, I think, is the most not misunderstood, but just we don't have a lot of information out there about it because people think they're going to scan something and that's digital and I can use it. Here I have this file. Oftentimes then they take whatever they just scanned and they do throw it away. But scanning and digital preservation are not the same thing. So the first component of a digital archive is creating an archival master TIFF file. So when you scan something, you scan it with a desktop scanner or whatever. You tend to scan it to a JPEG, a PNG, a PDF. Those are all like what we geeks call their web derivative files. They're meant to use on the web. They're great. You can put them on social. You can share them. That's what their purpose is. But they're a very small file, and they're in a format that a couple years from now, if that long, the web's not going to render those images anymore. It's not. There's going to be a new file format. We're already seeing it with like live photos, and that's always going to be changing. And so rather than be daunted by, we have to constantly keep up with this change, we need a strategy that's a true preservation strategy. So that involves, in our imaging labs here, the best practices are, it's an overhead camera capture. If you pay someone to digitize your materials, there are lots of, I think, and our website has some resources on this. You want to capture a very, very large file. And there's an international standard about what those files should be. And the idea is, as technology changes, you can always go back to that file and create new derivative formats. But if you scan to a smaller format, you can't do that. Like you're going to continue to have compressed, and the quality is not going to be the same, or it's going to be stuck in a file format that nobody can open anymore. So that's the one piece of it. The other piece is how the materials are cataloged and tagged. So I said that often one needs to think like a researcher in these older software platforms. Like you think like going to a card catalog, you often have to type last name, comma, first name in order to find someone, right? That's not very Google friendly. People expect to search materials using the normal words that they use, and even maybe having a typo or two, but that algorithm is going to produce the results they're expecting. And if no results are produced, then they're going to assume it doesn't exist. So you can produce as many perfectly digitally preserved files that are going to be great for all time, but nobody's ever going to be able to find them if you don't get that piece right of the access. So those two core components of digital archives, those are the things to get right. And the greatest challenges really are around understanding that, investing the time and resources necessary to create that sort of environment, because it can often be cost prohibitive. It's so daunting, and there's just this like desire, we'll just scan it. There's pressure to become digital, so people scan it, and that's almost worse than doing nothing.
What are some of the types of organizations that frequently are looking for digital archiving solutions?
I think history is everywhere, right? It's absolutely everywhere. And so I often say that any organization that's older than 5 minutes and can discover new value from being able to tell their story is a potential History IT partner. So we work a lot with organizations where people are always like, "What? You work with fraternities and sororities? What? You work with junior league? You work with professional sports?" Our market is very large. Of course, we work in the places you would expect us to work: museums, historical societies, libraries, the places where most people think history lives, right? It's absolutely imperative we get that digital in the right way. But I'm also really passionate about all of these troves of histories, nonprofit organizations, businesses, small, medium, and large, families, churches, other religious congregations of all denominations, because those all have the ability, that the stories that are hidden in them, they're able to tell stories that often organizations don't even know they can tell because they don't even know what's there. So they tell stories about them, about the organization. Sororities, for example, we work with many sororities, many fraternities. Sororities are not just the history of that organization. They are the history of women in higher education in this country over 150 years. And so the history of, you can tell so many stories, you can see bigger stories through that lens. And that's something I'm quite passionate about. Yeah, we really do work with pretty much anyone who has piles of paper and objects and artifacts and photographs that need to not only preserve the materials, because they're the only ones in existence that can tell these stories, both good and bad. I think it's imperative that we just find a solution for all of them.
You brought up a point that leads into another question, which is, what are, like you mentioned, one opportunity with identifying unknown people in a photograph, but what are some of the opportunities that exist for organizations to leverage their historical content? What are some of the ways that you see them using these digital archives really successfully?
Top of the list is fundraising and engagement, audience engagement, whether that's member engagement, alumni engagement, general engagement of the public in their story, having content to tell various stories about your history. Those are by far the largest. And fundraising in particular, So the project to build your digital archive over whatever period of time, that's a project that fundraisers can work to build toward. And we spend a lot of time working with our partners to help them understand that raising money both for and with historical projects is not just to be focused on the 2% of your membership or your public that self-identify as caring about history, because really only 2% genuinely do enough to give their money to it, is my estimate. But 100% of people care about themselves and their own legacy and the legacy of organizations that they belong to or a particular aspect of it. So we look at and we are not fundraisers, by the way, to be clear, that's purely in your realm, but we look at how they can utilize content as smaller campaigns. So it's not we're raising money for history, we're raising money to preserve the legacy of military service in this instance, or philanthropy or athletics or whatever these topics are, because all of that content relates to something. So there's that opportunity for fundraising. There's also then, once you complete a digital archive and museum and it has been tagged at that level I was talking about, every name, every subject, every event, then people whose job and or hobby, like whose passion it is to engage people, whether to donate funds or to become more involved in an organization or to spread the word, whatever that piece is, you are able to, within minutes, put together a customized presentation that is specific to a person or a group or a topic that they're passionate about, if your organization has a connection to it. Because you're just typing in a Google-like environment and you're using tags to pull all of this content together, as well as discovering new opportunities. Wow, did you ever know that we did this, or this person was really involved here? It's really fascinating to see how the use of that digital archive, and all of the content in it, once it's accessible, all of the various ways people use that storytelling platform to engage people.
You're certainly involved in driving what the future of digital archives and that storytelling piece looks like for organizations. What do you see as the next step? What is something that you see on the horizon that we should be thinking about?
There's always just how much more there is to do and that we can't do it fast enough. I think that the more people who are doing what we're doing and taking the information we're providing, the knowledge we're providing, and sharing that with other people, I think that's important. But as a technologist, without doubt, the key piece in our world today that will change what we do is AI. In most ways for the better if we're very careful with it. Even like to build a digital archive, many of the organizations that invest in digitizing or digitally preserving everything that they have, which is the best approach to take. Even when we do it, we spend usually 60 to 80,000 hours to do that. AI gives us the possibility of a lot of that content being tagged a lot more easily. There are a lot of biases we have to be very careful of, but it will change the amount of time it takes to tag a considerable amount of content. We have to do it in a very careful way. We're integrating it into our software, but again, carefully and thoughtfully. But that is the piece that will change, I think, our ability to preserve more and more quickly.
Kristen, I have enjoyed our conversation today immensely. Is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience before we wrap up today?
No, learn more about what we do, HistoryIT.com, #SaveHistory on all the social places. And yeah, always happy to talk about anything relating to, bringing your organization new value with your historical content.
Super, super interesting. Thanks again for taking some time to sit down with us today.
Thank you, Leah.